welcome to the podcast series, A Burden for the Times, a conversation on culture and race. I'm your host, Adrian Burden, and I am with my brothers, Aaron and Anton, to tackle some crucial topics in order to have some clarifying conversation about race. Typically, you probably don't get to know us on a personal level unless we give a personal illustration. So, lightning round here, guys, right before we jump into the content of what we're getting ready to go into, starting with Aaron. Tell me your hobbies, something you enjoy, just something about yourself. The listeners can get more of a humanization of who you are and what you're about, man.
Well, I think if the listeners know me at all, they know one of my main hobbies is photography. So I'm a macro photographer, landscape nature photographer. I've shared a lot of photos and had a lot of experiences with it. So I enjoy shooting images.
All right, Anton, over to you, man. Lightning round, just something about yourself so the listeners know a little bit into your personal life.
I love to fish. I love to play video games, Smash Brothers, Call of Duty. Yeah, that's about it. I'm lame.
All right. And and for me, I guess we kept it lightning round. We kept it quick. And so for me, I'm a Mario lover, all things Mario. I love tech, enjoying consumer electronics and testing them out and trying them out. I also enjoy just deal shopping. I don't know how else you say it. You know, getting a good deal and getting a bargain is just something I enjoy. So just a little bit about ourselves in the personal light. But in this podcast, we're going to dive in. We have titled it The Weaponizing of Voices. We're going to talk about cognitive biases. We're going to talk about confirmation bias specifically. Our outline of how we're going to go through this topic is this. We're going to define it, make sure that we're all on the same page. We don't want to assume anything that somebody's saying one way or the other. And then we're going to go talk about biases in the past being played out. And then we're going to look at our current culture today and understand what confirmation bias is doing here. So, Aaron, let's start with you. Give me your definition. Then I'm going to kind of flush things out. And then, Anton, you can go ahead and finish things up as far as definitions are concerned.
Yeah, I guess my definition would just be confirmation bias would be something like when I want something, an idea to be true, like I want something to be how I believe it is, everything I see kind of confirms that. So I start looking in everyday life, and because I believe this true, everything about everything that I see makes it look like this is true. I have a bias one way. Like I think life should be a certain way. And so then as I live life, I just kind of see that, oh yeah, everything points to that I'm right and this is the way life is. The confirmation bias can be dangerous. I don't think it's dangerous because we have a bias, but what I think is dangerous about confirmation bias is that when we start to look at other people's bias, and it's a fancy way of describing the instinct to believe the worst things about people, if that makes sense. Oh. Like we look at it and I believe things should be a certain way. And so I have a bias, which we all have biases. I think we all have biases. But then when I block out other people and believe them to be wrong and then think the worst of them because of it, all of a sudden, like I have to put them down. I have to nope, you're not telling the truth. I have to call them liar, call them names because they don't agree with me. Then that becomes the problem of confirmation bias, if that makes sense.
Okay. Hey, let me play devil's advocate a little bit to your definition. Anton, you might even want to jump into this. Do you automatically, in the word confirmation bias, do you automatically then assume the other side of what Aaron's saying is that you after you do assume whatever it is your bias is and something's against it, that you automatically then assume the worst of that person? Not saying that you said that, Aaron, but I'm just saying, do you concur with that, Anton?
I don't. The only thing I would I guess I agree with 90% of what Aaron said. The only thing I was going to add is because for me, I think a big thing with confirmation bias, understanding that to me, it's not intentional. So I don't really assume the worst. I think most confirmation biases are not intentional. They're really just built into where you grew up, what you've seen success. If you live in, and again, I'm just generalizing here, a white suburban neighborhood that's nice, you'll assume that all white suburban neighborhoods are nice and things that differ from that are not nice. I don't think that's because you're a bad person. I think that's because that's what you've seen. So I think it's very unintentional. That's why I wouldn't necessarily say for me it's a negative immediately.
Yeah, and I think I'm saying the same thing, but the only thing that I think is you may live in that neighborhood, but when somebody tells you, no, all of them are like that, and you kind of double down. You're like, no, okay. It is, because this is my experience. So since this is my experience, this is how it is. And it's not that you just have a bias like, oh, this is how I've grown up or this is what I've seen. Like, oh, everything's that way. I feel like that the negative comes, because we all have those biases. The negative comes when I am given new information, and then I push back and I'm like, No, that's not the way it is. That's not the way it is because I experienced this, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, so you're on this. Okay, we can get to that same conclusion. I'm going to look at it from really quickly a biblical perspective, and then I'm going to look at this psychological perspective. You know, being in seminary and doing different things, probably some people will be familiar with the words exegesis and eisegesis. These two words that are used to be able to describe Bible study. Exegesis, the Greek word means to lead out of. That means you are led by conclusions out of the text. You're reading the text, and what the text means. You're then teaching out from what the original intent was the text. Eisegesis means you lead into. That means you inject your ideas into the text, and then you start making some assumptions, which is dangerous many times. So confirmation bias in this case would here be like an eisegesis. Is you're leading into situations and you're automatically making assumptions into different things. Now, in psychology, you have your confirmation bias, which I'll just described there, but then you have a consensual bias. It has the idea that you see a certain mode of behaviors inside your circles, and you feel that what you're used to is common and appropriate because that's just the way you've seen it done. Business has been conducted this way. It's worked. It's been good. It's a consensus. It's just consensus says that this is something that works. There's also another bias, just in-group bias of favoritism. It's just kind of like, you have a group that you call your in group, and you have your group that's your out group. So you have your in group people, and you typically will listen and favor their ideas more than somebody out of your group. So if your news source says something in your group, you'll listen, but somebody outside of your news source could say something that's great, but because they're out of that group, you already have a bias that is not right. So then a cognitive bias of functional fixedness would also be a way of kind of saying something's been traditionally right, therefore it will always be right. I mean, it's been right in the past, so therefore it has to be right now. It's another bias. And then lastly, there's the illusory truth effect, which is the tendency to believe false information to be correct after you've been told it a bunch of different times. After repeated exposure to the same thing, you eventually begin to think that it's right. So by summarizing it then, I liken it to five statements. Cognitive biases happen with confirmation bias is this. It says, my way is right. See, my way is just right. Consensual bias says, my way is balanced. Like because balance is just different for every person. And obviously my life circumstances dictate that my way is the best balanced way. In-group bias would say, well, our way, the way that we have done it is right. Functional fixedness would say, our way that we have done it has always been right. Tradition can prove our way is right. And then the illusory truth effect can be says like this, our way just can't be wrong, because we've heard it again and again and again. So therefore, it just can't be wrong. So that's all of the biases, I would say, psychologically. But we're going to focus in there on confirmation bias. So just before we move to point B, I just want to say, is it fair then when we speak of confirmation biases, basically we're saying all of these ones kind of been, whether it be tradition, in-group bias, all these different things can be covered. So any questions about us going forward? I mean, I think we're relatively on the same page, but are we on the same page of what the definition then of confirmation bias? And do you think there's any loophole that we haven't made clear for the listeners?
And I don't know if Anton, did you? I know you spoke to my definition, but did you give your definition?
I believe we're all on the same page. Like I said, to me, I think there's going to be like nuances of a confirmation bias, like whether we're talking, like I said, of being intentional or unintentional, and also, which I think later we'll discuss other things about it, but I think that's later on.
All right, so let's go ahead and move on then to a confirmation bias being played out in the past. I've cited the verse, Proverbs 18:17. He that is first in his own cause seemeth just, but his neighbor cometh and searcheth him. So you got this guy who's doing something first, and it seems like it's right, but his neighbor's coming essentially and saying, hey, double check that. And so in history, have you seen confirmation bias played out?
Yeah, I think confirmation bias has played out many times in history, especially in the Black community. The thing that I was going to talk about in particular was the movie The Birth of a Nation in 1915. I'm not sure if you guys know Birth of the Nation, what it's about.
Yeah. I know the movie, yep.
Yeah, it's based on the book Klansman by Thomas Dixon. The movie is pretty much about the antebellum South, and after the Civil War, and in the beginning, obviously, before the Civil War, how nice the culture was back there, and how the Southern gentlemen, how the blacks liked to be slaves, and then after the Union soldiers came down, how the black people kind of took over the government, and they were lazy, and some of them chose them to be overly sexual, and a lot of ridiculous situations. And the movie was a hit. It was actually the first movie ever screened at the White House. Right. Until Gone with the Wind, it was the highest grossing film. And actually in 2015, they did a adjustment for inflation. And actually, if the movie had made $1.8 billion, which puts it in a very high tier, even in today's standards, of how much that movie made. Now, of course, in the movie, a lot of the actors who were playing black people were actually just white people in blackface. The movie was actually, obviously written, directed by white individuals. And there are so many elite white people saying how great of a description it was for black people, although I think most of us today could look at the movie and obviously say this was not a representation of any real black people. However, when you took people in an environment where that's what they believed black people to be, something that's such a caricature of a person could pass only in a place where you already have expectations. You've already convinced yourself what black people are like. And no matter how ridiculous, because of course these people didn't exist. Of course these situations are ridiculous, but only in an environment where other people are telling you and your society tells you that this must be what black people are like, would you accept something so, really, I would say ignorant. And I think, and so many times, again, going to slavery, going through Jim Crow, what you see is that a lot of white Americans are accepting these ideas, not because they make sense, if honestly we were critically thinking about them, but mainly because they already fit our biases. And that's why I think historically and even going forward, confirmation bias is such a dangerous topic.
I was looking at it from a perspective of the church, and as far as just those who proclaim the name of Christ, is that many times people would say that their biases would come from the Bible. So therefore, the reason that I believe and have the biases that I have is because my mentality and my heart is rooted in Scripture. Now, that is definitely the goal of a person, to be able to think and to be able to let the Bible dictate what they should think. Now, we understand, though, the problem of saying that all of our biases are then based upon the Bible. One thing is that we are growing in Christ every single day. So if I have not grown in my spiritual life in the past 5 or 10 years, and now as I'm growing in Christ, I'm making different conclusions and I'm able to start making better decisions, and God is helping me to grow. Well, so the problem then of seeing it played out in the past is that there are some conservatives that would say, hey, my biases are based in the Bible, and here is how I treated people, or here my biases are based in the Bible. And so the thing is you get that convoluted then many times, because sometimes it could just be a lot more of Adrian coming out in that bias than Jesus coming out in that bias. And so I believe that a balances and biases left just unchecked, just because we told a Bible inside of our hands, sometimes we can automatically assume, and that's what I just want to warn against. Not saying it's bad to have those biases with inside of Scripture, but the thing is just assume, because I am carrying a Bible, that all of the confirmation biases, all of the feelings I'm have toward situations are automatically of God, and he is cool with it. Because as that verse in Proverbs 18:17 says, but his neighbor cometh and searcheth him. Maybe a neighbor comes and says, hey, that bias you have towards such and such, maybe the feeling that you are jumping on, this bandwagon you're jumping on, might not be something that God is okay with. Aaron, do you have anything to add about confirmation bias being played out in the past?
Yeah, I would throw in the fact of adding to what you and Anton said, and maybe not in the church necessarily, but in life in general. I have friends, right, who talk about the world's going downhill. If it wouldn't be great if we had like the days back in the 50s and the 60s or the 40s when such and such is happening. And it's like, oh, yeah, those are the great times. People went to church. People wore suits every day. I don't know where Leave It to Beaver was, what year that is. But like we have this like, oh, man, this is the way it was. And then like, honestly, when you talk to a black person, it's like, no, why would I want to go back? Like, what in the world? Like, why would I want the U.S. to be but we have this like bias, right? That back then everything was cool. Like if we go back to when everything was great, and that's just not the case, right? In history, we can look back at it now and kind of glamorize some things because we want to believe that we were. I'm trying not to say "Make America Great Again," but we're trying to go back and look through and say, "Oh man, all these times were so good. Oh man, when the Pilgrims were here, or when we do look back on them, and because we like to believe that we're good people, and it kind of goes back to episode 2, right? Cultural Christianity. Anton's still thinking through some of those things, and it comes through like, yeah, we have a thought process. And like Adrian said, that sometimes just because we're Christian or because we think Christian things doesn't mean we're always doing Christian things. And so we kind of put our bias on, well, it was good because we were doing all these good things. And we kind of overlook the bad things, if that makes sense. I mean, does that fit in what you're talking about?
Oh man, I think it's a great one because many times when people are like the good old days like then, you're exactly right. I have that inside feeling of okay, so you say, my friend. But anyway, all right. So we see how it's played out in the past, and obviously, as we see many times, it's repeating itself going through. I believe majority of the time during this podcast, let's talk about the confirmation bias affecting us today, because we title this the weaponizing of voices, and that might be kind of confusing for some because it's affecting us today in probably a larger scale because of social media. Now many people's voices are much louder, much more broad spectrum of people to whom's being reached, and so therefore things are being shared and liked, and quite honestly, social media in some ways, in my opinion, has just been a giant dumpster fire as far as for Christians as they're trying to go and be able to pronounce Christ, but they have no voice because of maybe something that might be said in the past. So we'll start with, let's see, Anton, let's start with you on this one, okay? Confirmation bias affecting us today, yay or nay? Am I drumming it up too much? And then we'll come Aaron, and then I'm sure you have some feelings and stuff about it, but am I drumming up too much, or do you think, this is a giant problem to which we see?
Oh, I think confirmation bias is an incredible problem today. I think, like you just brought up, I think social media has amplified a problem that always existed. And I think especially what has become so problematic about confirmation bias today is that not only are you able to curate your news feed, you can also curate your news sources, right? So now you just have, instead of actually having shared facts, we don't even have that anymore. Like at this point, I'm on a social media site with only people who agree with me, in a chat room with no one who's going to say something I disagree with. And anyone who does, just mildly get out of line, they are blocked within 10 seconds, and we'll never hear that voice ever again in our life. And then and to me, that's the problem, is the fact that we are not only in our little echo chambers, but now we don't let anyone in, and our ideas go unchallenged. And that's what concerns me the most, is that people make what I would consider incredibly bold statements. And there is nobody who's even in the back who says, that's a little off. I don't know, Tim. We might have to fact check that. Exactly. And I think when you do that for so long, I don't know how you are able to ever come back and agree. Because I'm like, to me, what is, again, incredibly concerning is the fact that it's in the church, the place where it's like you think you would have at least a level of truth that we would agree on. And now we're eroding that level of truth by breaking what would agree to be objective facts that are just, and Aaron brought it up, and I think it's part of the cultural problem you want to talk about history, is that if you go back in time to the 1860s, again, I'm sure this will be debatable to some people, but everyone knew the Civil War was about slavery. You get to 1960s, now we have to question that. And that is so detrimental, because if you can't agree on the foundation, you can't keep building the building. You're just going to sit around and argue over what would have been in the past objective facts. And that's why I think as we've gone further, it's such a concerning problem.
I was going to say, for those people who don't believe that the war was about slavery, please just go read the secession papers of the states that seceded. So just go read those real quick, and they'll be quick to tell you the reason they left was because of slavery.
Well, Anton, you talk about curating your news sources and different things. I thought that was an interesting point. So let me just fire this back at you before we go over to Aaron. Do you believe that confirmation bias and cancel culture are brothers, or am I making a false equivalency here?
No, I think I would agree with that. I think that's a great analogy. They are pretty much the same thing. One leads to the next one.
Okay, it's a process. It's a process to what you see continue to go through.
Yes.
Because basically, I got to have people that confirm me, and then if you don't confirm me, then get out, stay out of my life. So interesting. So, Aaron, affecting us today. So, what do you think this is as big of a problem, or am I blowing it up to some degree, or how do you see it?
No, I think it is a problem. Continue what Anton's saying, and I think continue in the same vein, right? So once I put myself into this bubble, so to speak, of only hearing the same things, and then everything I share, everything I scream out is from this bubble. And like Anton said, that when you pause and say, when the first person says, hey, wait a second, I don't know if that's true. Have you thought that? Then you come at that person and you're like, no, this is true. This is true, or leave me alone. I didn't ask you. I can just comment here or wherever I want to. And it's like, whoa, but wait, I think I have more information that you need. And I think we see it a lot, right? Can I be transparent for just a little bit, right? At the beginning of 2020.
Permission to. Yes.
Yes, at the beginning of 2020, toward the middle, somewhere around April and May, when the race things were probably at their height. May's going to take us right at like a fever pitch, and probably around May. Like people that I know that are Christians are posting things about Black people that are not true, like we've talked about in earlier, right? So, and they're finding other people to say it, right? So they're saying things that aren't true about Black people, just totally throwing confirmation bias out. Like, this news source says this, and they have particular people who say it, right? So once again, I'm being transparent here. It's nobody but us and whoever's listening.
Great way to put that.
So, but you have like your Candace Owens, who is saying things that are like outlandish, okay? And this is what she gets paid to do. She's a media person. She stirs up things, and she's saying all these things. And so people that I know and that I genuinely love and have friendship with are taking these things because another Black person says them and firing them out. And honestly, they're hurtful. Yeah. There were nights where people said these things and did these things. And like when I try to bring it up to them or say something, it's no. Like I can't remember one of my friends posted something, and I'll use this one because I think this won't even affect anyone, but they posted Black people should just be thankful because 6,000 or however many people died in the Civil War, just however many white people died to keep you free. And it was like, this statement is not true. I don't know who was saying unthankful. Like, this is like way out of left field. And it's like, but when you try to confront people about it, they just say, hey, you just need to be thankful, or this is truth because, and they cite some source from some off the wall place. And it's like, well, once you put yourself in that bubble and you're not willing, bias is fine. Like, hey, I had this thought about such and such, but I came and talked to somebody and they gave me new information and I changed. But when we double down on it, it's the problem, at least in my feeling. So these things, when I'm going back to being transparent again, these things hurt me and my wife very much so. There were nights where me and my wife sat on the couch and cried together, because people were saying things that weren't true, but in their bubble, it sounded really good. It's one thing to say that Black people have a problem with fatherhood, but it's a whole other thing to belittle every Black father. And it's
weaponizing.
Like, I know,
yes,
yeah,
weaponizing.
I am a Black father, and I'm trying. Like, I haven't been to jail. I haven't been doing all these things, and to hear these things hurled out, and then to try to approach these people and say, hey, that's not the case. That's not the case. And to hear people push back on you or just double down on it, you're like, do you guys even care? Like, do you even care about me? And so then it makes me back up. And so, yeah, I think it's dangerous. I've experienced it in my own life that just once I get into this bubble and get in this fever pitch of believing that things are a certain way and not hearing, like, not actually talking to a Black person about how it feels, then yeah, it causes problems. And I'm going to go and be my own devil's advocate, and I'm going to say it's going to go the opposite way also. So this is not me picking on white people. I'm going to say there are black people that I have talked to that are so like agitated about all the things right now, they will give a white person the benefit of the doubt. You can tell them, like, I have some white friends and they don't believe that, and they're not going to listen to it anytime because they formed their own confirmation bias. Like, this is the way white people are, this is the way black people are. And yes, I believe it's dangerous because as soon as we both look at each other and say, this is how so-and-so is, or this is how so-and-so is, and we just start hurling accusations, we end up with 2020. Like, this is where we end up with.
Exactly. Now I'm gonna take what you said a little step further, and then I'm gonna follow up the question, because if you drop a name on the podcast, we got to have a little bit of time to explain a couple of things, and you dropped a name, so we're gonna come back to that in just a second. But let's just say the statement's true. 6,000 white people died and stuff, for freedom and different things. When I hear statements, and let's just say they switched out the numbers and got everything right and different things. One thing that I do find troubling is like a white person to say something like that. It really is offensive to the black community because, oh, so you want a cookie for then fighting to be able to do something that should have never happened? Something that
right.
People being brought from another country to be enslaved. And now the fact that you're releasing them now is to be something that we're going to like give out, like some little handbags for. It's like, what are we looking for? What kind of pat on the back then of just human decency of what God requires of image bearers of Christ as far as the rights that he would then say is okay. And again, you can switch it to any different community, even going back to different cultures who have had different arguments and things in the past. But anyway, I just say that from a rudimentary perspective, because sometimes we don't want to lose the tree in the midst of all the different little pieces of bark. But anyway, Aaron, though, you mentioned Candace. Now, there will be some people who will be hardcore Candace Owens' friend. Now, you're saying that some of the things she's saying is just not true. Now, I've heard Candace say things that are true. I didn't like her tone and how she went across it. So tell me then, back up to some degree, why it is you would then feel that she is strongly part of a confirmation culture.
I have read Candace Owens' book Blackout because I have friends who genuinely believe Candace Owens is trying to help the situation. I think she does say some things are true. Everything that she says is not a lie, but I do believe she is a media personality like Matt Walsh. And I need to stop calling names, because if I start calling names, we'll be here all day. But like we all know all the Bill O'Reilly, they're all paid people, and people want to hear outlandish stuff. Rush Limbaugh got to where he was, not because he was trying to like be truthful. He's an outlandish person. So then when he starts saying things like talent on loan from God, like when he starts saying these things, like we listen to him because of these things, right? Because of their personality. I give you that. They're entertaining. But sometimes, like in Candace's spot, she's saying things that she knows people wants to hear. And that's how you build a media company. And so when you start saying things that people want to hear, sometimes you get a little outlandish. So in her book, Blackout, she mentioned the time that she says, I don't have the quote right in front of me, and I should. I have it on my Kindle. But she said something to the effect of, there's nothing redeemable in Black culture. And it's just like, what?
Wow.
What? Like she's trying to think, and some people read the book and it's just like, oh yeah, because they're thugs and all this thing. And she just goes through, she has a whole section of her book on the Bible, and she's taking a lot of verses out of context. But if you want to hear her viewpoint and you agree with her viewpoint, it probably sounds great. It does. But when you stop and look at and you actually ask a couple of Black people, now, are there Black people that like Candace Owens? Yes, I know lots of Black people that like Candace Owens. But I also know a lot of people who Candace Owens gives them pause, because it's like, whoa, what are you talking about? Like when Candace Owens is first to come out with, before someone even dies, to say outlandish things like almost to the fact that they deserve to die, that could be a problem. That could be a problem. And so these are the things that I struggle with. So here's the thing about confirmation bias, right? It's not a problem that I have a bias. It's not a problem for a person to like Candace Owens. Hey, I like the way she says things. I like the way whoever. Like some people like Trevor Noah from The Daily Show. I like Trevor Noah from The Daily Show. I do not watch Daily Show, but I know people who do. So as we start doing it, that's fine. But the problem with the bias comes is when I shut out anybody else. And so with somebody who would call that into question and then all of a sudden saying, what? Are you kidding me? There's a problem with that. And then you have to double down on it. So when Candace Owens said something way off the wall about Black people, and as a white person, you share it 500,000 times because she said something that as a white person you couldn't say, but now you can say it because a Black person said it, that's a problem. That's a problem. And when Black people call you out on it, yeah. And when Black people call it out and say, whoa, you can't, that's not the truth. Or maybe that's not the way it should have been said. Then you have a problem. You have a bias, and you can't just come up and say, hey, why don't I talk to other people to find out why this is an issue? So am I making sense of why I call her name?
I think that's great. Anton, do you have any follow-up for him? Because I have a biblical perspective about that exact same thing in just a moment.
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing, because when you were talking, like, Candace Owens has never really went either way for me. But my only issue I have with Candace Owens, and when I was thinking, when we were all younger, I don't know if you guys, when we went to youth conference, you had the male and the female section. You had that one time when you were teenagers and they separate you.
Yeah.
If a woman ever got up during that talk and just said, women are terrible, women are trash, in front of the male audience, and there was a female in the back, and she just flame blasted women for like 10 minutes, a woman standing in front of all men, I think the woman in the back would go, what is wrong with these people? And to me, my biggest problem with Candace Owens, if you want to help the Black community, Candace Owens is not talking to the Black community, by and large. Right. Yeah. She is preaching to the white community about the Black community. And if you want to bother me, just keep preaching to the people who have nothing to do with the conversation. If you're interested in Black fathers, go talk to Black fathers. Don't tell an audience full of white people about Black fathers. It's not helpful to the audience you say you're trying to help. And that is my biggest problem, is anyone who is a Black voice that has nothing to do or does not even really talk to the Black community, and honestly, at times feels like they are trying to go around the Black community just to talk about them to other people. That bothers me greatly.
Yeah, I see this in another perspective as well, because many times, switch it over to where Christ was. And Christ always spoke truth. I understand that sometimes truth, many times it hurts, and many times it is something that's not always the most pleasant thing to hear. Iron sharpening iron. When that iron goes against another piece of iron, it's not necessarily a pleasant experience all the time. But do you know what's interesting? In 1 Peter, the Bible says that Jesus threatened not. He never threatened somebody. So Jesus had all power, and he could have on the cross looked down at those people and just kind of just made some sneer off the cuff remark to those people, like, y'all just wait, because one day I'm coming back, buddy, and when I come back, I'm gonna kill all of you. I'm gonna kill your ancestors. Like, he could have said that, and he would have been right. It would have been truthful, but he never used truth and weaponized truth. He never used his power that he had. He used his power to let them know what was going wrong, but he never used it in a way that would make an audience of people feel so inferior and so horrible that it was just kind of like they just run away. And it's almost like, yes, his statements and kind of made some people obviously shuffle, but it was always because of the truth, not because of the way he presented. The reason that I struggle, the first video and many of the other videos that came after, and again, I know there's ones who do, and I care deeply. I mean, we're just picking on Candace, but Candace was the one that, obviously was very loud voice during the George Floyd case and others. It was just almost like these realm of just I don't even know the word, but just verbal, just assault against the entire Black community. Just wake up, you bunch of idiots, blankety blank people and blankety dads. And this is her speech. And it's just kind of like, are you kidding me? Like, look, I'm fine with truth. I'm fine with it. But it's the same thing you would see people who would take the Bible and weaponize scripture and bend things out because they want to believe a certain thing. So they take a verse and then they twist it to their thing and then use it then to what we would call bash people over the head. I think it's wrong in whatever setting you put it in. And so that would be my even just saying, hey, Christ had all that at this disposal. And he never, 1 Peter says, he threatened not, even though he had all power and all truth as well. Well, anything else you want to add to the conversation, guys, before we say from a little bit of helps or hope in this area of biases?
Can I add one thing to it? Can I just a thought here? especially in our conservative Christian circles, and this is who I don't know who's listening, but I'm going to speak to this for a moment. Sometimes we enjoy those hardcore yelling, screaming, tell it like it is people. And sometimes we like that personality so much that we overlook a lot of things that they do and say because we think that they're speaking truth. And I think there's a danger in that. There's a danger. There's an audience for it. And like, it's very entertaining. I mean, we can talk about preachers that were growing up, right? That yelled and screamed and said all kinds of stuff. And it wasn't, I mean, a lot of it was true. Some of it was true. Some of it wasn't true, but some of it was true. But there is something to, as a conservative, loving that hard line, hey, toe it up, pull yourself by the bootstraps, I did this kind of voice. And sometimes we just have to ask ourselves, hey, number one, is it true? But number two, who is this helping? Because I don't know anybody who's ever jumped in my face and yelled at me and changed anything in my life. I don't know anybody. I mean, I guess I wasn't in the Marine Corps or anything, but I don't know, outside of the military, I don't know any person who walked into my office and told me I was an idiot and I was stupid. And I was like, oh, wow, let me hear more. Like, I don't know who else is learning from this. And so I'm going to have to say, as a conservative, and I'm putting myself in the midst of this, sometimes we got to be careful about those voices. Like, we like them and we think that everybody else, and we share them like, hey, this person said, and I'm going to, especially in our context, hey, there may be some outspoken Black people who are saying some things that may be true, and maybe, I mean, they're like going at it. But if their voice isn't worth hearing, like the way they're saying it isn't helpful, when you share that, when you put that out there, all I hear is it coming from you, from your mouth. So if you say all these horrible things about, if you post a post of this horrible, of a Black person saying all these horrible things, like Adrian said, like Black people and cursing, or Black people, it has a few curse words, but I like what they're saying, or whatever the case is, and they are hammering Black people, I am not taking that from them. I'm taking it from you. And I am thinking, as a Black person, wow, you don't like Black people. And that could be my confirmation bias, and I'm willing to call it if it is. But I'm just saying that is what it feels like. So I just want to add to that.
Hey, and that is a great point, because when on earth would it ever be excusable for a person who is a proclaimer of the gospel, maybe a pastor or an elder within a church, that I don't realize usually they'll be at a conference and they preach against things like that, or having that kind of spirit or whatever, and then to be able to share it with that caveat because of what she says, because we really need this confirmation that the Black community needs to hear. We really need this faith. So we're even willing to cross over our own lines to be able to make that statement. And I believe that's a dangerous path. That's a dangerous place to be. Anton, let's go ahead and get into this conclusion area before we get to our tips and tools. What do you see helps for this bias and different things that we have? Anything come to mind? Obviously, we all have them biblically. You know, we look at it. There's a lot of different things, scripture that helps us in this area. But practically speaking, what would you say?
I would say, honestly, we're discussing the most important part. I think the most important thing for confirmation bias is understanding that you have one.
Hey, that's
like everything, trying to fight and pretending that I am the most, which everyone believes, I am the most unbiased person in the world. I judge everything based on sheer logic and nothing else. That's the problem, is because we all know that's not true. Like, obviously, I'm going to come at things from a Christian and a Black perspective. Everything that's presented to me is going to be filtered in those two lenses. Now, I can surround myself with people who have different lenses to help me see the things I'm not seeing. But the biggest thing is to make sure I understand those are my views. And I have to surround myself with people who don't have those lenses or have different lenses to help see the picture fully.
Aaron, what do you think?
I think, just to add on to what Anton says, I'm going to say I'm going to put myself in situations that push my bias. Like, I'm going to, so when I talk about the reason I read Candace Owens' book is because I was also reading books by other people that I didn't agree. So what is it? What's her name? Patrice, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, wrote her book, When They Call You a Terrorist. I read her book, and I wanted to give the same thing to Candace. I wanted to read her book. Do I agree with either one of them? Nope. but I want my bias to be, I want to be pushed. Like, and I'm like, and maybe everybody's not there, but I want to know, hey, do I agree the phrase Black Lives Matter? Do I have to give a caveat of, well, I don't agree with this? No, I think what they're doing is important. I do. So as I say that being important, I want to hear her perspective. She has a perspective that's way different than mine, and I don't agree with most of it. But I still want to hear it because I want to be pushed out. And the same thing with Candace. Like, do I agree with most of the things she's saying? No, I think they're two women on the opposite poles fighting for different things. But most of all, reading them both made me think through what makes this important. Why is all the screaming? Why is all the yelling? I want to pull myself out to see if I can understand where they're coming from. And it's been a help. And I would say the same thing for in any confirmation bias. Like, hey, I'm going to go through because sometimes I hope it's not the case, but maybe on our podcast, we may like shoot at white people more than what we should. I don't know. But what I'd say is I would say the same thing for a black person. If you live in a all black community and all you're around is black people, you should open up and read some books and buy some people who are not this year. Yeah. I've tried my hardest to listen to voices from different sides. So I have downed the white authors that I've been reading, and I've upped the black authors. The same thing. If all you do is read black authors, you should turn down the black authors, turn up the white authors, turn up an Asian author, turn up a woman author, or what the podcast you listen to. And then once again, I'm not saying listen to straight out garbage. If they're way off the thing, don't listen to garbage, but do open yourself up to another perspective. Take time. I think Barack Obama's new memoir is coming out. If you're conservative and you hate everything about Barack Obama,
that is a great point. Yeah.
Take time to read. And you'll understand this is why. You don't have to agree with his principles, but you can look at it and say, whoa, okay, this is the perspective he was coming from. And it helps stretch my bias. I find the bias, like Anton says, is not that somebody disagrees, not that I have a bias or not that I see the world through a lens. It's when I reject every other person or every other evidence that comes through that lens and say, it's not true because it's not for me, or it's not true because it didn't come from my tribe. It's not true because, and I think there is the problem.
Well, I think that's an excellent point. I think people can even hear you, even if they disagree with you, especially about the Candace Owens, but the fact that you took time to read the book. You know, you gave both sides of it. You know, the other lady who started Black Lives Matter, the movement and stuff. You read this, you read what they have to say. I remember seeing a meme on Facebook a little while back shared by somebody, and it was basically a meme that had Michelle Obama at the top, and her hair was all messed up, and she was just, it wasn't a good picture of her, and then Melania, and then basically it was saying something to the effect of like, wow, I'm glad that we have a woman with some class. Now, I'm not going to go into my, really depth of feeling of how I feel about that ridiculous meme. But the fact of the matter is, though, my wife had just read Becoming by Michelle Obama. Exactly. I didn't read the whole book, but I mean, come on. Are you kidding me? Have you read, do you know what this woman is? Do you know what she's accomplished inside? Like, now, look, you don't like her policies. I get it. But a meme like that does not change or help the situation at all. But anyway, I think that embracing the reality of somebody else and that we have biases of our own, I think if far as for me saying, hey, then how do we then help it is, I think sometimes this is a tendency that we sometimes have is that because we have a certain badge on our little vest, then therefore it's the immune badge to having any type of biases. As soon as let's just say a black person says we grew up in a white neighborhood, or a white person says they grew up in a black neighborhood. See, I grew up in a black neighborhood, so therefore I don't have any bias. Like that's like saying, well, see, I'm a dad. That means I'm awesome. All dads are awesome, right? It's like that's not the point. Just because you are not around black people or around white people, or not because you're around different cultures, doesn't mean that automatically you have this immune badge that we don't feel or don't have any of these, embedded biases inside of us. And I think the embracing the reality of seeing different perspectives, when those things are challenged, when our perspectives are challenged, that is when we see the real us come up. And if this podcast has made you take your phone and throw it across the room, I'm just saying, just take 2 steps and just think to yourself, you might have a bias, and for me and for ourselves as well, is when people say, well, y'all just look at from one perspective or whatever, then we have to be willing to embrace that reality as well. So I do think there's help for it, but I think the gospel meets everything. The gospel solves everything. And part of what the gospel solves in this case, to which we are speaking of right now, when the gospel comes to a person's life, they have to realize that they have a need for Christ. They accept the death, burial, resurrection of Christ and believe in the Lord Jesus Christ to be saved. In this case, the gospel can't even get its work of redemption work in of helping a person with racism if we cannot realize or even biases if we can't even realize the first step of, I have an issue. I have a problem with sin. I have a problem with this bias before Christ's glorifying work of then being able to view people as image bearers of Christ. That can't be changed until we first realize there's an issue. So the gospel solves everything. But lastly, we've gone a little bit long, but tips and tools. Oh, you have something else, Aaron?
No, I'm saying exactly. I agree with you.
Okay. Tips and tools. Who wants to start off? You just jump in and start off.
Well, Aaron already took my tips and tools because that's exactly what I was going to say.
Hey,
I was just going to say, instead of Fox, just turn on CNN. If you're CNN, go ahead and turn on some Fox. Let's see what everyone else in the world thinks besides our little
new one called. What's that one?
What about Newsmax? I need some Newsmax.
There we go.
Newsmax, go all the way to MSNBC.
Hey, you see, this shows my bias. I need to mix it up and try to say go for all, get a little dipping. Don't be judging as you go forward. Great point. Aaron, what you got?
Well, my pick is going to be MeWe. No, I'm just kidding. Totally kidding.
That's for a different podcast at another time.
I'm totally kidding. I need to stop. But man, I'm gonna go with every time we have a conversation, like I end up changing my pick. I think I come in with a pick and I have two, but I'm gonna go with, and I'm gonna save it for another day. I'm gonna go with "Mistakes Are Made, Not by Me" by Carol Tavris. Tavris is her last name. But mistakes were made, but not by me. Why we justify foolish beliefs, bad decisions, and hurtful acts. Now, again, as you read through the book, there's going to be things you don't agree with. As a Christian, there are things that I don't agree with. But there's a lot of good things to think about because their main premise in this book is that how we trick our brains to believe things that aren't true. We go through different situations and it just confirms that we are right when it's not. It's not confirming that we're right, but we just see it that way. So I'm going to go with "Mistakes Were Made, Not by Me." There's an audio version. I have the Kindle version. I enjoy reading, so sometimes I'm trying to get ones that aren't books, but that's going to be my tool.
I'm going to go with a book, Misreading Scripture with Your Western Eyes. I enjoy, and then the follow-up book by Randolph and his the other guy is also Misreading Scripture with Your Individualistic. Yes, I'm reading that right now, so I'm not going to say that's my pick for right now. But Misreading Scripture with the Western Eyes. I mean, aside from James Clear's book Atomic Habits this year, that has been my favorite book and stuff that I have just really, really enjoyed. Just kind of just challenges your perspective. How easy it is that I grew up a certain way, I feel a certain way, and so therefore I interpret the world a certain way. And if I do not realize that, then it really does affect the way that I see things. So anyway, those are the picks. And anything else you want to close off with, guys, or we can call it a day?
All I want to do is close off with one thing. And Anton's tip, encourage you. You may switch your voice for just a little bit, but view them as human beings, not as the enemy. They're not the arch enemy of you, the superhero. There are other people who have a voice. And if they're not speaking truth, then balance with the truth of God and then make a decision, because this is what discernment is. But if they have a different perspective, see if you can see them as a human being. I think in the book Cast, she talks about it's hard to dehumanize a person you've gotten to know. So stop and get to know somebody, because then we can stop dehumanizing them, throwing them into categories, and then letting those categories determine how we treat a whole different group of people. Like, let's just get to know people, treat them like humans, treat them like you'd like to be treated, and see what happens.
I was going to add one more thing to what he just said. I think a lot of us already have people we know that we disagree with, that we already respect, and refuse to have difficult conversations with them because we respect them. So if you are already close to someone who you know could have these conversations with, do it.
Yeah.
I think that's honestly part of the problem.
You know, as the Burden Brothers, we have this podcast, but we as Burden Brothers know we've had some hard knockout, drag out conversations.
One or two.
Well, I think this has been golden as far as the advice given at the end, not just because y'all are my brothers and stuff, but just because I do believe this has been something the Lord has been really speaking to us about for a long time, and to put into a podcast format is definitely a joy for us. And so anyway, we thank you so much for joining us. If you have questions or concerns or different things you would like to add to the conversation, we encourage you to email us at aburdenforthetimes@gmail.com. And we look forward for you joining us next time.